Mara Collins hadn't eaten since Tuesday. She was 26 years old, 3 months behind on rent, and wearing the same coat she'd worn to her mother's funeral 2 years ago, the lining torn at the shoulder, the buttons mismatched where she'd replaced them herself. Her car had died on the highway 4 days ago. She was taking the bus to her third job interview this week, the third one that wouldn't call back. She had $11 in her account, a phone on 4% battery, and a father in a care facility whose bill was due in 9 days. But every single morning, without fail, Mara still packed a second sandwich in her bag. Not for herself. For whoever looked like they needed it more. That morning, she packed it, boarded the commuter flight, and sat down next to a man in a gray suit who was about to change everything. But before those 10 Cadillacs arrived, you need to understand exactly who Mara Collins was. Because what she did on that plane wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It was everything her life had built her to be. And it started long before that flight. Mara Collins had never owned anything that wasn't secondhand. Her apartment on Fulton Street was a third-floor walk-up with a radiator that hissed through the night and a window that wouldn't fully close in winter. She stuffed the gap with a folded dish towel every November and told herself it built character. She was 26. No degree. No savings account worth mentioning. No one left to call when things got hard. Her mother had passed from a stroke 3 years ago, fast, without warning, the way the worst things always happen. Her father, Dale, was 61 and living in Sunrise Care Facility 40 minutes outside Pittsburgh, his memory quietly folding in on itself, one lost name at a time. The facility cost $2,400 a month. Mara covered it working 3 jobs. Waitress at a breakfast diner, 5 mornings a week. Data entry for a logistics firm, remote, evenings. And every other Saturday, she cleaned offices in a downtown building where the executives left their coffee cups on the floor like someone else's problem. She never complained. Not once. Her one coworker at the diner, a sharp-eyed woman named Peggy, 53, who had seen everything twice, watched Mara split her staff meal every single shift with whoever came in looking hungry and said nothing. One morning Peggy finally asked. Asterisk, you know you're not required to do that. Asterisk. Mara looked up and smiled, tired, genuine, unbothered. I know, she said. Asterisk, that's why I do it. Asterisk. Peggy watched her walk back to her tables and shook her head slowly. She'd worked this diner 11 years. She'd never seen anyone give like that without wanting something back. She didn't know yet what that quality was worth. Neither did Mara. What Mara didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the quiet man in the gray suit sitting in seat 24B was worth $4.2 billion. And he had already noticed something about her before the plane even left the ground. The flight was a short one. Pittsburgh to Chicago. 1 hour and 12 minutes. The kind of route businessmen took without looking up from their laptops. Mara had saved for the ticket 3 weeks. Her father's specialist was in Chicago, the only neurologist in the Midwest who had seen his specific condition twice before. The appointment had taken 4 months to schedule. She boarded last. Seat 24C. Middle seat. The man in 24B was already there when she sat down. Gray suit. No tie. Silver watch that caught the cabin light once and looked away. He had the kind of stillness that didn't come from relaxation, it came from control. The sort of man who had made so many decisions that his face had stopped showing the weight of them. His name was Richard Hale. 51 years old. Founder and CEO of Hale Consolidated, an infrastructure firm worth $4.2 billion with contracts in 17 states. His photograph had been on the cover of Forbes twice. He had declined a third time. Mara didn't know any of that. She just noticed he hadn't touched the sandwich in the paper bag on his tray. And that his hands, steady, controlled, had a faint tremor in the left one he was working hard not to show. She said nothing. She pulled her own sandwich from her bag, the second one, the one she'd packed for someone else, and placed it on her tray. Then the cabin lurched. Not turbulence. Something harder. Something wrong. The lights flickered. A flight attendant grabbed the nearest headrest. From the cockpit, muffled, controlled, but unmistakably urgent, a voice said 4 words. Asterisk, brace. 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 Asterisk. But Richard Hale didn't survive 51 years by trusting one moment. What happened next would either confirm everything he thought about Mara Collins, or prove him completely wrong. And what she did next, he never saw coming. The cabin dropped. Not a dip. A full, stomach-leaving fall that sent drinks across the ceiling and turned screaming into something involuntary. The left engine was gone. Everyone on board knew it without being told, the sound made it plain. A hollow, grinding absence where there had been power. Panic moved through the cabin like a wave. A woman 2 rows back clutched her armrest and sobbed. A businessman in 22A grabbed his phone with shaking hands and couldn't unlock it. A young boy across the aisle, maybe 7, traveling alone, a paper tag on his wrist, went completely silent in the way children do when they are too frightened to make sound. Mara looked at the boy first. She unbuckled. The flight attendant shouted for passengers to stay seated. Mara was already across the aisle, crouching beside him, her hand over his. "Hey," she said quietly. Calm. Like the cabin wasn't tilting. Asterisk, what's your name? Asterisk. The boy stared at her. Mine's Mara, she said. Asterisk, I'm a little scared too. But I need someone brave to sit with me. You think you can do that? Asterisk. His name was Carter. He nodded once, jaw tight. She moved him to her seat. Buckled him herself. Kept one hand on his shoulder. Richard Hale watched all of it. He had not moved. Not from composure, he was as frightened as anyone. But he couldn't stop watching her. The way she didn't calculate. Didn't hesitate. Didn't look around to see if anyone noticed what she was doing. She just moved toward the fear. The plane leveled at 3,000 feet, shaking violently, descending fast toward an emergency strip outside Columbus. Richard's left hand had stopped trembling. He was gripping her empty armrest. The plane had stopped. The danger was over. But for Mara Collins, the most life-changing 24 hours of her entire existence were only just beginning. And she had absolutely no idea. The plane hit the emergency strip hard. Both front tires blew on impact. The cabin filled with the shriek of metal on asphalt before everything lurched to a stop in a cloud of smoke and silence. For 3 seconds nobody moved. Then Mara unbuckled Carter, checked his face, his arms, his breathing, methodical, steady, and said simply, Asterisk, you were brave. I meant that. Asterisk. The boy burst into tears the way children do when the danger finally passes. She held him until the emergency crew reached the door. Richard found her on the tarmac 40 minutes later. She was sitting on a concrete barrier alone, her torn coat pulled around her shoulders, watching the ambulances. Not on her phone. Not talking to anyone. Just sitting with it the way people do when they've been through something and need a moment to put themselves back together quietly. He sat down beside her without asking. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The boy, Richard finally said. Asterisk, you didn't think about it. Asterisk. There wasn't anything to think about, Mara said. He looked at her the way he looked at balance sheets, carefully, completely. Asterisk, what's your name? Asterisk. Asterisk, Mara Collins. Asterisk. Asterisk, what do you do, Mara Collins? Asterisk. She almost smiled. Asterisk, which job? Asterisk. He was quiet for a moment. Then, asterisk, all of them. Asterisk. She told him. The diner. The data entry. The office cleaning. Her father in the care facility. The specialist in Chicago she hadn't reached yet. Richard listened without interrupting. Something his executives would have found unrecognizable. When she finished he said nothing for a long time. Then, asterisk, I'd like to get your father that appointment. Today. My physician. Best in the country. Asterisk. Mara looked at him. I don't need charity, she said quietly. It isn't, Richard said. Asterisk, you held a frightened child together while a plane was falling. I'm a man who pays what things are worth. Asterisk. She searched his face for performance. There wasn't any. Okay, she said simply. Asterisk, thank you. Asterisk. The next morning, Mara woke to her phone ringing at 6 a.m. Her neighbor called first. Then Peggy from the diner. Then 3 numbers she didn't recognize. She went to her window. 10 black Cadillacs were parked in a quiet line down Fulton Street below. A man in a dark suit stood at her building entrance holding an envelope. Inside, a letter on Hale consolidated letterhead. Handwritten at the bottom in Richard's hand. Asterisk, your father's care is covered. Fully. Indefinitely, asterisk. There is also a position here if you want it, Director of Community Operations. You already know how to do the job. R.H. Mara Collins took the position. She negotiated one condition before signing, that 20% of the department's annual budget go directly to single-parent households in financial crisis. Richard agreed before she finished the sentence. Dale Collins was transferred to a private facility in Pittsburgh within the week. On his first morning there he looked up at Mara from a sunlit chair by the window, recognized her face, and said her name clearly for the first time in 8 months. She didn't tell anyone about that moment. Some things are too real for words. Peggy heard the news 3 days later and stood behind the diner counter for a long moment without moving. Then she took Mara's old apron off the hook, the one she'd left folded on her last shift, and hung it on the wall behind the register. Nobody asked her why. They didn't need to. Some people move through the world waiting for someone to notice their worth. Mara Collins never waited. She just kept showing up, for strangers, for her father, for a frightened boy on a falling plane. And the right person was always watching.